Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. My name is Tucker Hazell, and this is Dev Dive, a show where I get a chance to talk to interesting game developers about their games. And today, I'm joined by not one, but two team members from Ivy Road Games. We've got Stephen Margolin and Temi here to talk about Wanderstop, the new game from Ivy Road and Annapurna, and some cool creative minds that have brought us a very unique game. We're going to dive into it here today. But first of all, thank both of you for joining me. I'm excited to talk to two people with two very different roles on a game.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's super exciting.
The first thing that I really do want to dig into with both of you is to just get a sense of you and your histories as game developers and in the game sphere. So, Temi, we're going to start with you. What is sort of your story with games and then getting into being a game developer and then coming to Ivy Road as sort of the current group that you're working with?
Yeah, so my story with games is maybe not typical, but I don't even know what a typical game entry is at this point anymore, which I used to maybe feel more complicated about. Now I'm just like, yeah, I think I would still repeat the same trajectory that I took to get in here. But anyway, it started with me going to architecture school and actually being a trained architect. And I think maybe like halfway through, I was like, I don't care about gravity. Like, I just love the part of designing where you get to make the stuff in 3D and then like you get to make all these pretty drawings that you like print out at huge scales. But I had this scholarship that like wouldn't allow me really to change my major. And at the end of the day, like, I'm African and African parents are always about like practical jobs, and game design was not one of those things at the time. Yeah, they're eating their words now, though, for sure. Started there, ended up going to work at this architecture firm in New York City called Seldorf Architects, and I mean, they were really cool to me. They like allowed me to really shove virtual reality down their throats. At the time, it was like 2016, and so it was only new to other realms that weren't games. And so because I had a love of games and like played a bunch of them growing up and like was already looking to get into the industry, I knew that like virtual reality wasn't just for games, that it could be used in architecture as well. And so they were super cool to me and allowed me to like bring it into the practice. And then I ended up kind of being the creative director there on all of their like virtual reality projects. At that point, I was like, okay, I've done the architecture thing. I actually hate this. I'm the most depressed I've ever been in my life, even though, I like got to do this virtual
Yeah.
reality thing.
Important thing to learn is what you
Yeah,
don't want to do.
exactly. And I learned the hard way. That is absolutely me to a T. I always learn the hard way. So I did that and I was like, you know what, F this. I want to go to game design school. And I was lucky enough to be in a city that had one because there are so many cities that don't. And so I went to NYU Game Center, did my MFA there, ended up meeting a bunch of incredible game devs. The cool thing about the program is that they have teachers who are practicing indie devs and they make a bunch of different projects. And so that's where I met Bennett Foddy, who has done so many games, but is currently working on Baby Steps. Y'all should check that out.
Very excited for that.
Yeah, that's gonna be sick. They were all my professors, which was sick. And so from that point, I like graduated the program and then got connected with Davey from Bennett because he needed somebody to do art, and so that was my path into it.
And Stephen, what about you? What's your story?
I went to video game college for nerds, but not for my MFA. Don't have an MFA. So I have a bachelor's of science in game design from Champlain College up in Burlington, Vermont. And it was a fun time. I knew I wanted to make games kind of at a pretty young age. I was always like obsessed with the medium and really enjoyed it, and had like the rare opportunity that the community college in the town I grew up with had a game dev program. And through a weird quirk of the system, the community college library was part of the public library system. So I was like a freshman in high school checking out all these like really high level game design textbooks and like struggling my way through them. But it really like helped really cement that transition in my head from like consumer to informed, and then informed is the first step that led me all on the process to where I am now. And then I worked in and around New England for a while because Vermont is great, and I live here now, and I really like it. So I've worked for studios in Boston. I've worked remote for studios in Montreal. I worked remote for a bunch of West Coast companies, including Niantic, which was where I was directly before coming to Ivy Road about a little over 2.5 years ago, when the team identified a need for a game designer and specific depth to the gameplay to support all the beautiful art that Temi and company were making, and the narrative and all of that. So that's my story.
Yeah, and I am curious just to learn from the two of you a little bit about the story of the Ivy Road team in general. This is your group's first game, and as you each mentioned, you have different roles on the team, and you each came to join the team and join the project at different times. And so, any sort of background knowledge you can sort of share with the audience about who Ivy Road is and what it's like working on that team, I think would be very cool to hear.
I came in like as soon as my MFA program was over. I took like the summer off because I was like pretty burnt out, and but like Davey had kind of been in consistent contact with me about joining the team. After I got to take a break, I joined at like the sort of tail end of 2019. At the time, Davey was pitching that I could either come to Austin and like join the members that were there, or I could like go to Vancouver because he was going to try to set up an in-person studio in Vancouver. And I was like, there's no way in hell I'm going to Vancouver. It's too far from like everything I've ever known. I was living in New York at the time. I was like, I could come down to Austin. I think that could be a nice change of scene. Like I've never lived in the South. I'm also like so over the winters here in the Northeast. And New York was just too dirty. Like I was just like, I need to get out of here. I think I visited Austin and like I stayed in this really green area and I was like, wow, there are trees like everywhere. At the time of me joining, it was just 3 people in person. That was Brad, who was the art director at the time, Daniel, aka C418, and then Davey. And then at the time that I joined, actually, Andrew, our lead programmer, also joined. So the office, which was like this tiny, tiny, tiny ass closet, went from like 3 people to 5 people. I started 5 years ago almost. Davey, I think, started like almost 9 years ago, like from ideation. I think the first teammates who were on the team were about 7 years ago.
Yeah. And so, Stephen, joining into the project after it has been going on for a few years, the team is starting to grow. It's all partially remote, partially in person. What was that experience like joining that team and then being able to add your expertise?
Yeah, so I joined on post-COVID, and the team had fully transitioned into a completely remote work environment at that point. So people are still kind of located in hubs more based on population and less on workspace. I think for legal reasons, the company exists out of a PO box in Texas, but we have no office anymore. And that works for me. I was doing fully remote since before the pandemic. And then when that transition happened over, I was like, oh, this just fits the rest of my lifestyle, and it lets me live where I want to. And the only daily coworker I have to put up with is my cat. So why not? And
real talk, so real, dude.
I know, right? It's perfect.
No, seriously, I hated working in an office as much as I loved my job at the time. I knew I wasn't meant for it because every morning I'd come in and slap my headphones on my ears. Sure. I didn't want to say hi to anybody, even though I loved them as people. I was like, it's the only way I can get work done.
Well, we now know a little bit about each of you and sort of the growth of the team over the course of the last couple of years. But talking a little bit about Wanderstop in particular, this is a game that takes a lot of interesting inspirations from the recently very popular cozy games genre. And it's kind of a continuation and also subversion of that. And so I'm curious to see for both of you, for Temi, you are art director, level designer, environment lead on Wanderstop, and Stephen, you're the lead designer. For each of you, what are some of your favorite cozy games? And from those, what games did you take inspiration from, and were there things you wanted to take and make sure you included, or things maybe you wanted to avoid to make sure the game sort of stood out? Stephen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, cozy games are such an interesting genre because it's fairly new that we've used the language to codify them in this one specific way. but also it differs from a lot of other like game genres, which are typically identified by core mechanical set or like mechanical set interacting with player experience. Like something like Metroidvania, as well as being like a garbage nonsense word, describes how you experience the entire thing without necessarily being strictly the set of mechanics. But cozy is like another level of abstraction above that.
Cozy and horror are two abstract game genres, but they happen to represent the exact opposite vibes.
Yeah, right? They're entirely vibes based. And so coming in to me like, oh, we're making a cozy game doesn't actually mean anything mechanically or gameplay wise. So a lot of what I did when I came onto the project was sort of like seeing what was already in place, seeing what core mechanical hooks existed and where we wanted to drive to, and then spending a lot of time and having a lot of early conversations with Davey about like the narrative and the goals and the themes and what we really wanted players to experience, and then how to best achieve that. In terms of like what specific games inspired me, it was sort of a mix of all things. What I thought about most for Wanderstop was bringing the player into almost the uncomfortable tension between what they want to do and what Alta's feeling, because the player, like, this isn't an RPG. Alta is not an extension of the player, nor is this a perfect run through someone else's narrative type experience. Like, there exists this, like, duality, and finding ways to situate the player in that so that they are open to that experience and can really absorb everything the game is trying to do in that space. And I think we've been mostly successful at that. Some of the reviews really don't like it because they talk about how uncomfortable it is. And I'm like, success?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the cozy games that inspired me, obviously played a lot of Stardew, played a lot of Animal Crossing, but I was also inspired by like smaller indie titles, like less of a cozy game itself, but also Strange Horticulture. Top tier game. Really loved it. Short, sweet, knows what it's about, completes it to a T. And a lot of that inspired how I thought about like plants and gardening in the game, and specifically what is a digital representation of a plant and how can you interact with it without losing the, the realness of smelling it and getting your fingers in the dirt.
Very interesting, yeah. And Temi, what about you? Inspirations from other cozy games and things you wanted to take in terms of your style, or things you wanted to leave to make sure it was distinct.
I love that part of art direction when you get to like smash a bunch of stuff together, take the best parts of things. I feel like that's how the best art is made, by like combining things that you wouldn't think to put together. And so I appreciate like Stephen talking about some of the more like niche indie bits. There's always like some juicy stuff in there because it's people who don't give a fuck. They're just making. There were a ton of references for like level design, but also references for art specifically. I think like a good mix of both that I turned to quite often was Alba. Yeah, it has like a really great condensed open world design, which is essentially kind of what the clearing and Wanderstop is. Like it's not really open world, but it's like if you have one open space, like how do we sort of design this to make it feel like it is still dynamic, and like has many little parts to it. And so playing that game was super helpful in that way. And then I also liked ooblets, like because the colors in that game are just so yummy. They like do not shy away from saturation, which I think we definitely don't either.
No.
We definitely push it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like sort of magical realism in that game that I think Waterstop sort of emulates too. You don't really know like what time period things are in.
Yeah, definitely.
And like what's human, what's alien. Breath of the Wild I used for a ruin design, like that was a really good one. And then as far as like out of game, actually one that was really important was like looking up different botanical gardens
Cool.
all over the world. And that was for level design, but also a little bit of like designing of the environment too. But the whole point of botanical gardens is to meander, right? And like there's still like a lot of level design or like in this case, landscape architectural design, that is involved in like making that an enjoyable experience, but one that feels so like sort of natural, right? But also is deeply designed because they're considering like what they want you to see at what times. But yeah, those were kind of like my main references. And then it's funny that Steven said that they looked at Stardew Valley, because I like stayed away from Stardew Valley when I was looking at my references, and also Animal Crossing, just to not like fall into the trap of something that like is obviously very popular.
Sure. Yeah, definitely makes sense. And so I like that both of you, very early on in your conversation about what inspired you most or what interested you most about this project, were the plants in the game. Of course, it's something that's a very big part of Wanderstop, is that you are able to plant and grow and sort of crossbreed different hybrids of these plants that you're able then to make into different kinds of tea. And so let's talk about plants, and specifically the plants in Wanderstop. Stephen, on your end, designing the plants in terms of the game design perspective, how did you go about that? How did you go about making sure the plants were diverse enough or had different, the goals? I mean, it's kind of hard for me to internalize like how you even go about that process. But from your end, how did the plants relate to the way that you were approaching the design of Wanderstop?
Yeah. I want to start off by giving a big shout out to Andrew, our lead programmer, and Ethan, who did some game design on the project before I came on. Because I came on, like 5 years into development already or something, there was a lot of like foundational work that had been done. And so I was able to sort of step in and like pick up the reins and sort of guide it to completion. But I can't say the plant like design originated with me. Lots of people
Sure.
have touched this project and lots of excellent work has been done. When I did enter the project, we sort of had the idea of like, you can grow a garden. And there was like the basic idea of like, there are seeds that correspond to the different types of base plants. And then the base plants can combo together to make other types of things. And that was kind of it. And it wasn't really like developed or utilized in any specific way. So I entered in and I started like messing around with what existed and looking at our pattern system. And the pattern system is pretty wide and dynamic and could support like multiple layers of complexity. And although that was like fun to play with, it ended up being not really usable, because once you get outside more than like that first hex row, trying to match up the pattern becomes really difficult, and be like, oh, it's an X where you have like one in the center and then you have to go out two and then you have to do that and then surround it. And that was just like too much and ended up being too complex. So scaling back on that and deciding like, where in this process do we actually want the complexity to be, and what elements focus the player's time or attention. When I first joined on, the plants mostly kind of grew dynamically. And so one of my first contributions was to come in and be like, hey guys, it's a gardening game. Where's our watering can?
Sure.
Yeah. So making the watering can, and then my high effort just hired game design docs where I put out the whole loop and I say, look, if you add watering, you create moments of deeper player engagement through repeated action, yada, yada, yada. I still believe all of that, but no one reads design docs with big looping patterns in them. They exist only in the theoretical model for designers to be weird about. So jumping in and being like, let's make the pattern matching easier, but add in this extra step of having to manage and maintain your watering resource. Where is your can? Do you have it on you? Is it filled? If it's empty, how do you go back to it? And putting in those like extra steps of player action and the thought process that it would like engender greater connection, and so that players like see the efforts that they've put into it be rewarded in the plants, and then being able to harvest it and feel like this didn't just happen, it happened because I watered it, and like reinforcing that element of agency lends a feeling of completeness, I hope, to what is otherwise a simple system.
Yeah, and it's fun to hear that the system wasn't always that way, because from my mind, as someone who's not a game designer, you plant the seed and you put the watering can on it and it turned into the plant. That's like step one in my mind. But I like that the complexity, you were able to wrangle down complexity into something that ended up feeling a little bit more dynamic and engaging. And that's really fascinating from a design level, I think. And so, Temi, what about you? The plants are one of the most visually interesting and dynamic parts of this game, I think. And so, talk a little bit about designing the plants from an art perspective. You were an architecture designer, and I'm sure you have plenty of other experience in different kinds of visual art. But how did you take your inspirations and history as a designer and apply them to designing a whole host of alien plants with all sorts of different colors?
I was not the original brain behind a lot of the plant design. That was our concept artist, Natalie. But I can kind of explain her process and like also where I came in with trying to help flesh out the system as well. The way that the plants work, to reiterate, right, is that you hybridize them, but there's like base classes, I guess we can call them, with the 4 different types of seeds. And so within each base class, there was sort of like a characteristic that Natalie and I were thinking about, that they could share, even though
Yeah,
they are
sure.
totally different plants. So one, for example, was sort of like bark, like it being like a more firm plant versus like more leafy or bushy. And then within that, we'd have plants that existed in the real world, but then would get just exaggerated. So we try to find like niche plants that people, don't have in their houses. But there's also succulents, like we have like a sort of tall succulent plant that when you apply different colors to it and like stretch it and twist it, people don't necessarily recognize it. It seems alien, but they all have like human references. And then from that point, I think Natalie is, I mean, she's just super talented and like can just make things out of almost nothing seemingly. And so like she had made hybrids that were like totally new and like didn't necessarily feel like they came from the original base class of plants that we had. They were super cool. From that point, I was like, why don't we try to like think of this sort of like almost Pokemon-esque, where the things like are evolving, rather than being totally new. And so from that point, we tried to like think of, oh yeah, if you were to really combine these things, like what properties would they take in these like newer hybrids? And so from that point, she started to like almost Frankenstein these things together, and that was sort of the sort of like design process and thought around them.
I love that you mentioned the Pokemon comparison, because that's definitely something that like carried through when designing out the field guide and what kind of interactions were there, and the fact that like it starts off like not filled in, and you have the big question mark. Like literally internally, we call that like it's the "Who's that Pokemon" feature of
Yeah.
filling out your Pokedex, filling out your field guide, and then they evolve in the same way. That's cool. I love that synergy.
On my end, as someone who is a avid Pokemon fan and player, part of what engages me to a lot of games is a collection aspect and is the exploration and the discovery, and then being able to sort of look at all these things that I've found. And Wanderstop definitely scratches that itch in sort of a different way through the experimentation on both of your ends, from the visual side and also the design side of you're going to experiment with the different kinds of seeds and see what comes out of it. You don't know necessarily what it's going to look like, or how you're gonna or what flavor the leaves are going to make, but you get sort of this spark when you get it, when you find something new of this is something I can kind of add to my mental catalog, and I think it's very fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Temi, the plants weren't necessarily your main contribution to this game, is what I'm gathering. But what was your favorite part about working on the visual design of Wanderstop? It's a game that has very interesting trees and gradients and architecture and little funny tools and things like that. Was there something you really gravitated towards in the visual language of Wanderstop that you feel like is your magnum opus on this project?
Yeah. No pressure, Magnus Opus. I mean, yeah, I didn't work on the plants, but I worked on basically literally everything else. It's hard to choose your favorite baby, but I think I'm really proud of the shop first and foremost. I feel
Of
like
course,
the
yeah.
shop is just, I guess if that is a Magnus Opus, that would probably be my Magnus Opus. I feel like when I came in, the project was sort of like struggling to figure out a good feel and size for the thing. Like there were tons of sort of like blockout iterations of the space, but we couldn't figure out how to get form to follow function in a way that like didn't make it feel like a almost like a mansion. Every space in the shop is used for something, right? Like and that's kind of like what I feel like is successful in making it cozy too, but not cluttered. Cozy, but not cluttered. Also, just how distinct each part of it also looks. I think that there was some good synthesis between me and Natalie trying to figure out like what felt both practical for what it needed to be used for, what felt like really dreamy to look at. And then I'm also really proud of layout, all of the colors in the clearing. I feel like if there's something that I hope people connect with visually in this project and all other projects in Ivy Road is just how like we do not shy away from like really gorgeous, visually popping color. We love that. I love that shit.
Yeah, I like what you said about form following function and everything in this game having sort of a practical but also whimsical feel. And one thing I want to focus in on and ask you both about your contributions to is particularly the tea making mechanism in the center of this shop. That is by far my favorite part of this entire game. I loved interacting with it, and I especially loved what it looked like. I mean, this thing is insane. It's crazy. It's got all these tubes and little drippy bits and stuff. And so, Stephen, I'm curious on your end, what contributions you had towards making this tea making machine the way that it ended up. How did you decide how complicated to make it? How many steps you should have? What went in on the design side to making this really be sort of the centerpiece, I would say, of the game's experience?
It's the centerpiece because our art team is really incredible and made this super evocative, fun thing that you want to play around with. And so it was sort of like leaning into the affordances that were already in the visuals and making mechanical interactions that felt like they matched and reinforced it, and tried to add a tactile sensibility to your engagements with the machine without like taking it away and abstracting it all behind UI or something. Very much we wanted to keep it in the place that you're in. Like we have very minimal UI, like beautiful and illustrated, but otherwise minimal UI to try and keep the player present with Alta as they run through this experience. And I think it would be deeply lessened if you didn't actually have to like manually climb up around the thing and then turn to get to the right location and pump the bellows pretty aggressively. That was an area we spent quite a lot of time iterating on, the bellows specifically. Who knew you could spend an entire month just tuning the one heat variable and how quickly you have to mash that button? But it worked out right, and I think people really like it. And then the other major thing about like trying to make it feel tactile was having it return all of that information in the game space. So a lot of that comes in with support from everyone else across the team. Like when you hit a full boil, the steam whistle goes off. That was a contribution from Daniel. Our amazing VFX crew who put in the steam effect on the top when you hit the boil, and all of the particle effects when you toss in various elements. All of that like cements your player actions into the world actions and reinforcing those themes. That's, I think, what makes it feel real and makes it feel good, is that you can see the direct connection to how you manipulate it and how it exists in the space. And then, I mean, the tubes, love the tubes. It's amazing to watch the water go through and then also watch it like pick up the different colors. Brewing tea feels very immediate in this game, and we make you do the waiting beforehand with your tea balls instead of having to do the waiting with your steep, so that like you build up this sense of like interest and momentum, and then you hit your big thing and it like pays off and you go give the tea and you're like, look, I did it, and Boro smiles and tells you a funny story. That's the way the design reinforces through the tea machine and ties everything together.
Sure. Yeah. And so, Temi, from your side on the visual language of this crazy tea machine with all these spiraling tubes and different bulbs and things, how many tweaks, how many iterations, what was that process like of finally nailing down this crazy complicated design?
I think it definitely shows, like you said, how incredible it is. There's a direct line between that and how many people touched this thing. Like, I think at some point, everybody worked on this machine. I couldn't name everything that happened in the exact ways, but as far as like the big understanding is how it came together, the initial iterations were mainly Davies. Like he wanted to see how he could abstract the tea making process. Went through a couple different iterations of using different number of orbs. So initially, it actually all kind of came into one cauldron. There wasn't much breaking up the steps, but the final iteration that we landed on happened honestly maybe like a couple months after I got on the project. Davey felt pretty good about breaking up into 3 orbs, and from there, yeah, we all just kind of hit the ground running on me first trying to design the thing that was holding up the orbs. Right, it's kind of like almost like a. I think initially it was more beakery than it is now, but it still kind of feels like a sort of like science machine.
It's the world's coziest mad scientist machine I've ever seen.
Exactly. That's Boro, a mad scientist. That's how he lost his hair, actually, a bad experiment that gone wrong.
That is a true 100% canonical fact.
Oh,
Exactly.
interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, I had to like, after Davey was like 3 orbs, I worked with Natalie to build the thing that was holding up the 3 orbs. And from there, it was pretty much just iterating on like how the tea making process actually would happen. That was mainly Steven's thing. It wasn't until maybe like the last year of production that we ended up getting a lot of the icing on the cake with the tea machine and the tea shader. It was a lot of that. It was a lot of like, hey, I have ideas on like how to make this thing even drippier, even more beautiful. Let me just try some stuff out. Or like, what do you think of this? And it was just like a lot of like leveling on top of each other until we got it to be in a place of like, we feel really proud of this. It feels like juicy where it needs to feel. The process itself is also gratifying, like Stephen was talking about.
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk a little bit about small details, because one of my favorite things about this game is just walking around and noticing the fine little quirky things that exist in this environment that the characters say and do to one another, and any little fun design decisions that you made that you're very proud of that you think people might not notice or might not focus on. For me, one of the small things that I always found super satisfying is that last moment as you as the tea spirals down and then it comes into the cup and then always overflows just a little bit. And I like that last little bubble up and the tea coming out of the cup and then seeping into the tree and growing flowers. It's something that obviously doesn't need to happen, doesn't make a lot of sense, but it adds this last little, like, it builds this anticipation, even in the final moment of it's bubbling up and it comes over and now you're done. And it feels like a sigh of relief. And so I just like that detail a lot. I wanted to congratulate all you and your team on like that one little thing. But for each of you, Steve, we'll start with you. Is there any little fun design detail that you are super proud of, you think people should pay more attention to?
Mushrooms.
Ah, yes. Yeah. Yeah, the mushrooms are definitely something that I didn't really understand for the longest time. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. But yeah, they're definitely in the game.
Mushrooms were one of my little pet projects. And so anytime someone's like, oh, I played with the mushrooms and actually there's like real depth here, or you can get like really quirky things, or like, because we spent all this time talking about like the plants and how they came to be, but then it's like, did you know mushrooms make plants cooler? Go play with mushrooms. And that's one of my little favorite areas of the design that we reinforce in some of the tea requests, but is mostly just sort of left out there to let the world have this magical feeling and not have to explain everything, which makes it compelling and interesting and, in my mind, at least a little bit cozy. I like knowing that there's a greater sense of everything going on, and I don't know, I hope mushrooms do that for other people.
Yeah, they're great. Also, shout out to Constance for the little effects that she did on those two. Like, deeply unnecessary, but just gorge, you know?
Yeah, absolutely incredible.
Decadent. I really liked the extra visual effect that happens when you toss a trinket in. Not only that it happens up above in the cauldron, but I love that it happens in the little cup that you get too. I think that's like so cute. And I hope that players also enjoy that detail because it was one that like was really difficult to put together. This is so like banal, but I was really proud of the detail of the detective mode in the game because it was just something that I had randomly thought of. Like it was an issue that we were all like, how do we solve for this thing? We don't just want it to be black and white. And I had come up with the idea of like doing like this radial blur and helped our programmer April do it. And it was like so basic, but I don't know why it was like really fun to like get to like suggest this idea, and everybody's like, oh yeah, we could do it like this or do it like that. And that really stuck with me in the process.
I love that like synergy of we had like a design problem of people don't know how to find characters.
Yeah.
And we tossed about like different ways to coming up with it, and it's like, all right, well, we can highlight them in some way and like make them extra important. And then Temi comes in with like a like beautiful seamless art solution to a design problem, and it's like, hell yeah, this is what game dev is all about.
No, literally, those are my favorite moments when we're just like, how do we do this? And
Yeah.
then, yeah.
Well, you talk about sort of the problems that you had going through this relatively long development cycle for a game of this scope, and I'm curious what mistakes you made along the course of this process. This is going to be the bearing your heart of the game developer process, but is there any things that you remember happening as you were working on this game that you looking back, you're like, that was something I wish I could have fixed sooner?
Do you want to go first, Steven? Or you want me to go first?
I'm still thinking of good examples.
Okay.
You gotta flip through your Rolodex. Oh man, there's so many.
Yeah. I can think of two. Like, one was definitely maybe more personal in that, like, I tried to take on a mentorship role while also doing art direction for the first time, while also at a small indie studio. Like, it was a lot of like trying to juggle on top of like being a level designer and then like doing environment art. It's a lot of hats. Obviously, you always have to wear an indie. And I think trying to do that and mentor, I didn't get to do the best of both. And so I think would maybe think differently about how I try to do that in the future. And then the other one was not necessarily my mistake. I think it was just like something that I wish I'd caught sooner, which was this thing that I ended up calling a tea emergency that happened like way too late in production.
Oh man.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I do.
Yeah. So what had happened was I realized entirely too late because I was just testing tea colors. Like I was like, oh, I just want to make sure that like these color combinations actually look right, that they're popping the way they need to with all of our wonderful orders that Davey has come up with. But I realized in doing it that like a lot of the orders that were written were single ingredient teas. And so we wouldn't get to use like even 20% of the capacity of the shader that we had made. We wouldn't get all of these like really gorgeous looking combinations that you get to play in the game today. And so I think if this happened early in production, no problem, right? It's like, okay, let's just toss a couple of other ingredients in there and make sure it works with the narrative. But yeah, it was like entirely too late into production that we found this out. And fortunately, we were able to come up with a solution, but it was a lot of like fighting between like, no, I want this to look really gorgeous. Can we use these? And Davey's like, but it doesn't work with the narrative. And it's like
interesting.
Having to come together on what the solution was there. But I feel really proud, and I know Davey's really proud of the solution that we ended up coming to. It was just crazy how late we found this.
It's surprising to me that you mentioned that as like a mistake on your end, because I feel like that's honestly a mistake on my end. Like, as the designer, I should have been the center point between like art and narrative and like foresaw this coming, and it kind of slipped directly past me, and then you stepped up and took the mantle. So whoops, my bad, sorry about that.
We can both claim it, it's fine.
Okay, cool. For a very long time, we were very hands-off in the game, and so what you see now is sort of the end result of a lot of like kind of playtesting and running through it and coming to the conclusion that players don't like to read. And so at first we really wanted to lean into the idea that like, because there's no like external pressure or, you know, video game objectives telling you to do things, that players would like naturally follow their curiosity. And so for the first couple of years, it was just like the instructions on how to garden are in the gardening book upstairs. If you want to figure it out, go there and read it. But, you know, players don't like to read. And our playtests were pretty damning about that fact. So having to come back later on and be like, okay, we need a tutorial. How do we do it that doesn't disrupt the rest of like the flow and the themes of what we were trying to establish? And can we make it also meaningful to the character instead of just like, here's your video game pop-up that says press X to continue, you know? So that was something that we ended up working on and really coming to a pretty good solution. So far, no one's really complained about it yet. And big thank you to Davey for doing the heavy lifting on that and like tying the very rote mechanical necessary game tutorial information in with the overarching narrative of particularly Alta's initial arrival to the tea shop and like, this is Boro. He's here to be your friend, but also to tell you how to do shit. And finding that balance, I think it worked out well.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said about learning from the feedback of the playtesting process, because what I find so interesting about Wanderstop is a game that is very hands-off for the majority of the runtime. You talk about the tutorial, but after that, you're kind of left to your own devices to sort of figure out things, what the pace of the game is going to be, because the game is about slowing down and not letting objectives sort of permeate your mind too strongly. Like, stop and smell the roses is basically the entire mantra of this game. And I'm curious, as you watch the game evolve and then turn into the final project it is today, what sort of habits you saw players form. It's a game where you're really supposed to come up with your own way to approach the way you're pacing each day, approach the way you're interacting with the characters. And for me, one thing that I noticed as I was like building up my habits within the game, I selected a special cup especially when I started like finding different styles of mugs. I would select a special cup, and that would be the cup that I would bring to each person. Like I would have the lumpy blue one goes to this character, and like I associated them with different, and I didn't even mean to do that, but I'm like, no, that's their cup. Like they like that one. And I'm curious if there's any of those sort of habit forming things that either you did as you were playing the game or through watching playtesting or watching other players play the game, any interesting habits or things that you didn't expect that players ended up doing.
No, that's lovely. That's like what you've just described is like the ideal situation. It's like put these things in there. It's like, God, I hope someone does this.
Yeah. Earlier you asked me if I liked the game, and like there was some doubt in your mind. I just told you that I gave them each special cups. Do you think I liked the game?
Good, perfect, excellent. Yeah, not everyone has the same deep, intimate familiarity with every nook and cranny of the game that we do.
Yes.
I feel like I'm intimately familiar with them because I made all the mugs. That's the only reason.
Ah, okay.
So to like cycle back and answer your question of like what things did we hope players would do? Well, that's sort of the thing. It's like there's like all of these like little hooks and incentives and rewards that we put in, but it's a very like wide field. Because of the lack of objectives, it's sort of like, I hope the player finds this one interesting and pursues it, but I can't guarantee, so let's just scatter those little nuggets all over the place. And then it's like hard to almost like step back again. Like with fresh eyes, it was very easy to be like, oh, this does this and this does that and this does that. But now, like coming from it from the other side, I'm like, yeah, it's the game, man. These things happen. You just go do it. What's my pattern for doing it? I don't know. I have 150 hours in Wanderstop.
Yeah, of course.
Everything in this game is a pattern to me. It's an exciting place to be, but it's also like, it's now very hard to answer that question.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense.
That's real. I have a homie that played the game in what I think is like one of the most neurotic ways possible.
Okay.
Team making. Every order she received from a character, she would make like 3 times so that she could give like a version of it to every Pluffin in the game, and then to also drink herself as Alta on a different bench each time.
Holy moly. That would make the game take 3 times as long.
Yeah. Oh, and also each cup had to be a perfect pour.
Ah, okay.
It's just like too much. But yeah, anyway, that was her way of doing regimen.
Yeah, interesting.
They're pretty into like cozy games for that reason, like the building, the grinding in that aspect. She like wanted to grind Wanderstop, I guess, which is like
that's the opposite of the point of the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that I think, to sort of close things off, is what I think makes this game so distinct and interesting, and I think artistically fascinating in the time of games that we exist in now, is the way that you guys, through all of your design and tone and pacing and music and narrative. Just make a game about trying to take things slow. It is necessary for Alta as a character who has a lot of emotional baggage and frustration to slow things down and not worry so much about objectives, about grinding, about collectibles. The game is very laissez-faire, and I think especially just how many games there are now that are very much leaning into grinding or just like literally just leveling up, just watching numbers go up. This game rejects that, and I think that that is important for this period in time, and that's personally why I enjoyed it so much, is I found it thematically compelling on like a macro level, as like a design and narrative level rejection of a lot of people really like games because they can just sit there and grind and watch the numbers go up, and that's fine. I mean, that's not how I play my games, but I appreciate that you're able to make a game that says no to a lot of the things that people look for in games, but then you, I think, make it make sense within the world of the game.
I mean, it's perfectly said. I was just gonna say that my parents don't follow anything with video games, but they watch Summer Games Fest. And that was like one of their critiques as well, like in a sea full of like things that are about grinding, shooting, killing. It was really nice to see Wanderstop like really shine, because it's not about any of those things, and still like deeply connects with people. So
All right, well, any closing thoughts before we say goodbye here on our interview about Wanderstop?
Drink more tea.
tea over coffee.
Oh yeah, I'm not a coffee person. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Safe space.
This is a tea safe space, absolutely. But thank you very much, both of you, for joining me here on Dev Dive, for talking about the art of the game, the history of your studio, the complex and weird decisions that you guys made years into development. This is what I like about this series, is being able to sort of talk about the things that went wrong and talk about the things that you're really passionate about. So I really appreciate both of you for joining me, bringing two different perspectives to the story about this game, and I'm so happy I got a chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tucker, for having us.